Good afternoon, everyone. This is Hamid. I'm with the Linus Group. It's a pleasure to be with you on this December afternoon, and I'm very much looking forward to having our time together in the next 45 minutes. I'm hoping to share with you just a couple of models that we've come across in marketing in the broader healthcare world, whether it's in the sciences, in marketing to physicians, to care providers, or to patients, and then hopefully synthesize them together in a way that makes a more universal model for you, and delivering that moving forward. So on that front, I want to talk about journeying and what journeys mean and what they look like, and then pivot that over to how they relate to decisions, and then bring that in with storytelling. We hear a lot about storytelling these days, and so I want to bring that together, and then finally to synthesize it all, and if time permits, give you a very quick example of how this all comes together. So if you have a question, there's a question box in your GoToWebinar controller. Please feel free to type it in, and if time allows, I will address it. If time does not allow, I will follow up with you and all the rest of the participants in an attempt to answer your question. Okay, let's dive in and talk about journeys. Now, we hear a lot about customer journeys, and whoever customers are, it's a really powerful way when we map their experiences. It is the sum total of all the experiences that people have as they interact with an organization. Now, we can see where that comes from because, number one, the digital ecosystem is proliferating, and so people interact with an organization through a variety of touch points, as well as in the healthcare world, it is an online, offline experience. And I'm not just talking about marketing, I'm talking about the entire experience. And so bringing all of this together is really important. And so this is what journey mapping does, is it brings you this information. Now, journey mapping is important in experience design, in creating operational efficiencies. So a company that wants to, an organization that wants to make it more efficient for its customers to interact with it, then they can map the journey and find efficiencies. Clearly in marketing and sales effectiveness, which is really what a lot of this audience is interested in. And then in developing customer or patient satisfaction, we hear a lot about patient satisfaction in the US, especially with respect to how healthcare is being graded and how healthcare is being reimbursed. And so journey mapping is a really important part of that. And I love journey mapping because it allows you to really think about how your audiences experience you. Now, it doesn't take a lot to just type in journey mapping in Google and see that it pretty much, it has any and all formats, and it has all kinds of different information. But one thing that's really clear to us when we're looking at it and in our experience and working with this, let's actually map out what we think of as a universal patient journey. Now, this is very similar to physicians, to healthcare practitioners, to scientists, to lab directors. But let's just actually focus specifically on the patient journey map for a minute. It starts out with life. Things are happening. It's business as usual. The patient's going about their day, and then there's an incident that happens, and that leads to a diagnosis, which then hopefully leads to a treatment. And there's some change that happens, and then the patient forms and lives a new life. And so again, this is really, it can be mapped as sort of tactically as, a patient gets a sore throat, they're dropping off their kid at school, they get a sore throat, they go to the hospital, they wait in the waiting room, they get triaged, they get diagnosed, they're prescribed treatment, then they have some change in their lives, maybe they start washing their hands more, and they live a new life where they are no longer afflicted by this sore throat, to something much more dire like cancer and Alzheimer's and so on. So this to us is a pretty universal or a fundamental patient journey map. And the types of information that people and researchers add to patient journey maps are things like, what are the decision points along this experience? What are the emotions that the patient is feeling? How much energy is being spent in time and effort, and what are the barriers as they're going through? You know, I've seen a lot of journey maps where, you know, they're talking about wait times and the lack of transferability of information between one aspect of care to the other. Which channels are they interacting with? Again, remember, it's an online offline world, and so how does this all come together? So like I said, patient journey maps, or just journey maps in general, really powerful, and a great place for us to really understand our audiences and really put ourselves in their shoes and walk a mile in those shoes. So we mentioned emotions. This is an important part of this. Many of you are familiar with the 5 stages of grief, and there's actually, when we map this, you can actually see how the stages of grief really fit from the transition between one to the other. You know, there's a life happening, there's an incident that happens, and the first stage of this is denial. And then between the incident and the diagnosis, there may be some anger towards the diagnosis, anger toward the self, anger toward the world, and then bargaining. So, you know, again, this loosely can fit between diagnosis and when treatment happens. Patients can bargain with themselves, they can bargain with a higher power, they can bargain with their family members, they can bargain with their healthcare providers, with their doctors, and so on. And then through the treatment stage, there is this sort of depression that typically falls in before this moment of change, and then there's an acceptance in moving into a new life. Now, this is called the Kubler-Ross model. It's been around for a long time, more commonly known as the 5 stages of grief. My very favorite instances of this is in an episode of The Simpsons, when Homer Simpson eats poisonous blowfish and is given the sentence that he's going to die. And he goes through all stages of this in about 5 seconds. It's very funny. But really, it does map to this patient journey map. So again, here we have yet another universal framework to use to think, okay, what might be happening in the different stages of the patient, and how might they be feeling through all this. Now, patient journey maps are great. Like I said, it gets us closer to our audience if they're patients, or if they're, you know, for example, if they're scientists, we can do the same thing of their, mapping their journey. But there's a couple of drawbacks to journey mapping, and I'll talk about that in a second. One, they tend to be observational, meaning that they're typically just drawn out what happens from a chronological step. First this happens, then that happens, and so as a result, they stay on the surface of the true experience of whoever is going through this journey. They tend to be linear, and I've actually shared it with you in a linear fashion. And worlds don't happen in a linear way, and they also tend to be fairly tactical and tactile. It's the experience, which is good, and we want to know about that, but it's pretty tactical, and so they don't really lead to strategic insights that helps us as marketers really drive a new experience. So in order to bring that in, let's talk about decisions. And if any of you have interacted with me or with Linus, you know that we care deeply about and understanding how decisions are made, whether they're decisions in science, decisions in research, in the clinic, by doctors, by patients, by anybody. We really try to focus on how decisions are made. And so let me give you, what we believe as a decision journey map. It's basically understanding the anatomy of a decision and breaking it apart, deconstructing it into its significant and specific phases. So, in order for me to act on something, I need to change. There needs to be a change inside of me. And there's a series of steps that lead to that change prior to me actually taking that action. What are those steps? And what do I need in order to be satisfied, both intellectually as well as emotionally? What does my ego need to be satisfied in order for me to make that action? So decision journey mapping is a little bit different in that it actually is used in developing strategies. For more as far as marketing, it can help us construct our marketing funnel as we're driving people toward a decision. So it breaks apart from that linearity, from that tactical or chronological step, because as we all know as marketers, the audience is really who's driving their own decision. And so then it gives you the ability to create the right kind of content and then to model your metrics around this funnel and your content in order to have a much more meaningful set of key performance indicators in your analysis, and then hopefully to go back and optimize that. So again, let me share with you a fairly universal journey map. As you know, again, we've developed our own specifically for how scientists and clinicians think, but I'm going to give you even a more generalized one than that. Now, again, journey maps look, they can take all array of pretty colors and shapes, and many of them are circular, which I think is right, actually. Some of them should look like a funnel. Some of them are linear. I'm going to give it to you in a linear fashion, but they are more circular in nature than linear. So, and I'll talk about why they're circular. So the patient's buyer's journey, again, this is a very general one. It's not specific to patients, but life is status quo. Something is happening, and I'll just share with you, like as a scientist, you're going about your work. You're just every day you're doing your work. As a patient, or you're just a normal person. And then there's a disruption to that reality. Whatever it is, you either identify that you have a need, or you feel sick, or something happened, you encounter something you don't understand. Something disrupts the status quo reality. And then in order to make a decision, you go and you collect the right information, or what you deem to be the right information, in order to evaluate how you're going to go about making that decision. And then there comes a sort of a commitment of moving forward with that decision, and then a reinforcement through the entire experience that whether you made the right decision or not. And so this is basically how patients go through it, how doctors go through it, how hospital administrators go through it, how you and I go through it. This is basically what sets us off on a decision path. And so this commitment is really a key part. And the kinds of information, again, that you may want to add in a buyer's journey or a decision journey are what informational needs are there in each of these phases, what kind of messaging and content is going to work for your audience, what barriers they're going to face, and again, what channels are they going to use in order to gather and advance their own decision journey. So it's no surprise that there's actually a fairly high correlation between the patient journey that I shared with you and this decision journey. So you can see in the beginning, there's a life status quo where everything is normal, the old world. There's a disruption in the patient world through an incident. Then there's information that's provided. Oh, I have strep throat. That's information. It's a diagnosis. And then, well, I have different treatment options that I need to evaluate in order to figure it out and which one's going to work for me. Then there's a commitment to whatever I'm planning on doing as far as commitment, and that really is the change that I'm committing to. And then I can, when my sore throat goes away, I can live my new life. And in my new life, I'm reinforced by the good decision that I made. And the red arrows here point to the change, because change is really the critical moment where an action is made. Everything before that is just predisposing your audience to leading up to that change, and whether they make that change or not, it depends a lot on whether we've given them the right information and empowered them a lot along the way. Okay, so now that's two different models, a decision journey as well as just a user journey. Now let's talk about stories, because stories are the most powerful way that change happens. And the reason why stories are really compelling and powerful is because they're quite an ancient technology for how humans communicate. I mean, before there was language even, and before there was writing and text, people pass down information from generation to generation through stories. And children, you know, I mean, from sort of parents to children, from one generation to the next. If you're a parent, you know that your children don't have a lot of patience, let's say, or attention span, let's say. And so that's why stories came about, because they captivate the entire imagination of your audience. It's the same thing in today's sort of information overwhelmed world. Your audiences don't have the same attention span, or they're very busy. But people actually consume stories for for a variety of reasons. They consume them for entertainment reasons. They can consume them in order to find meaning in things or in life. They can consume it because in order to feel connected with each other or with humanity, just feeling good about that connection, as well as making decisions. But not all stories are constructed the same way. And so, you know, there's so much about telling patient stories. I can't tell you how many patient stories, you know, Linus creates on a you know, in a year, but not all patient stories really drive to action, which is a lot of times in sales and marketing what you really need. And so some of them may feel good, some of them may, you know, connect to meaning, some of them may just be entertaining. But if you really want your stories to really sort of galvanize a movement within your audiences and really inspire them to action, then there's one construct that is really best created to lead to that change. And that this is the hero's journey. So this is an old framework. This is by no means mine, but I've worked with several people who use this in a business context, and several people have really taken this into a variety of places. But at its core, it's actually an academic construct called a monomyth. And the whole idea is that there is a universal template for how the story is told about a hero. And essentially, it starts with a setting. So it gives you the background of what the story is in order for you to become familiar, and in order for you as the viewer to start to make connection between that world and your world. And then there's a call. There's either a call to adventure or a call to movement, or there's something that you need to do. The hero is compelled to go on this journey, to go on an adventure. And through this, they are met with a series of obstacles and challenges. And they identify a new path. So at this point, this new path is sometimes called the elixir. But there's and between this challenge and the new path, it's almost a life and death experience a lot of times for the hero. But they arrive at this new path, and then they form a change. They are changed by this new knowledge, by this new power, by this new path. And then they go and live a new life back into their old reality, but their old reality is now their new reality. So this is a simplified version of the hero's journey, and we find that these are the 6 really critical elements that need to be in a storyline in order for people to actually feel inspired and change and go and participate in that new life. Now, there are actors within the hero's journey, as you know. If you've watched any movie ever in the history of movies, you'll know that it's not a lonesome thing. And so there's the hero themselves. Very often there's a mentor, and that mentor really comes into play during that balance between the call and challenges. And the mentor will show up again through the concept of as the hero is faced with these challenges. There's also a helper, and the helper is the friend. It's usually in films. It's the comic relief. You know, I don't know if you ever watched Shrek, but Donkey is the helper, and he's very funny. But his role isn't just for comic relief. His role is to create connection. But his role is also to show that when that moment of life and death comes and that new path is there, that the hero must act alone. And so the helper is there so that his or her absence is also known during the critical part. And then that elixir is what is given that new path, new knowledge that forms that change in order for our hero to go and live a new life. So very sort of high level and esoteric. You may be thinking, you know, my audiences are a bunch of lab technicians who just sit there and pipette all day. It has nothing to do with anything. I think you will want to engage with this because your audiences, those lab technicians, are actually heroes. And anybody who wakes up in the morning in order to have purpose sees themselves as a hero in their life. And if we treat them as a hero, and if we communicate with them as if they're as a hero, then we can help them achieve their goals, and they will in return become loyal to us. Now, where are we in this whole thing as a brand, as a company, as a product? Well, we have choices. We can be the mentor, we can be the helper, or we can be the elixir. And there you can actually define that by going through the process of developing your user journeys as well as your decision journeys, and decide, you know, for example, if I'm a patient, my mentor may be my doctor. My mentor may be my religious leader. You know, it could be any of those things. My helper may be my nurse, my child, my parent. It could be a friend or anybody. The elixir may be a product. It could be the fact that I started to exercise and I recognize that I need this change in order to get into a new life. So by using all three of these, you can actually determine how to construct your story really, really well. And so to synthesize all this together, it's no surprise that it all fits in enough of a concordant manner that you can actually use all of these journey mappings and decision maps in order to come up with the story. And the story is where it becomes really tactical for you in marketing and in communications and in all of your customer touch points. So you can then develop something like a marketing funnel or a marketing flow and fit all of these steps into it. Now, how are these stories told? These stories can be told in a single touch point, like a film, for example, or something short or something interactive. But because, again, going back to because it's an online, offline world, and because the patient / customer they are the ones that are really driving their own timeline in all of this, and they're really living their own journey, you might want to break it up into small bite-sized portions of your storyline and then give it to them so that you can keep them along and keep them really making that their decision a good decision for themselves, and really keeping their momentum and their cadence toward a decision and toward a new life. So with today's marketing technologies and with today's digital ecosystems, we can absolutely create this story with as many front doors as we need in order for people to walk in and engage with the story wherever they are, but then to help them quickly nudge them to advance through their storyline. All right, let me give you a quick example on how this might manifest. So let's say you're a genetic testing company, and let's say you've identified the top is going to be the decision journey. So we've identified that people generally want to live longer and healthier, and this is really a critical aspect of society. And let's say you, as the genetic testing company, wants to really galvanize on this particular status quo in order to get more customers. And there's usually somewhere in life there's a disruption, there's a diagnosis somewhere that threatens their longevity. And what happens a lot of times is they will go and try to find information. And so they arrive at genetic tests, and they've quickly realized that they need to really take into consideration accuracy of the test, the actionability of the test. You know, if I get a test that says I've got all kinds of anomalies in my genome, but they're of uncertain significance, then what does that mean? Is my healthcare provider going to know what that means? And have I just wasted my money and have gotten myself more scared? What about privacy? What happens to my data? So many times people worry that having a genetic test will reveal to, for example, their healthcare providers that they might be a new risk factor, and so they might get denied care. And so there's all these worries and fears about privacy. What about the cost? So in this information gathering, basically in the genetic testing world, the decision is, to really evaluate and find a company that provides the most peace of mind. This is really what maybe people are looking for in order to commit to the genetic test. But then the next step is to contact the chosen company and to confirm those assumptions, and so really get that confirmation. Usually this is the first contact between customer and company. And think about it, it's step number 5 in the decision. And that's typical. We see that very often in many markets in the science and healthcare. The first contact happens quite late in the decision journey. I'm sure you've seen the studies that shows, I think people quote and misquote this number all the time. The first number that I saw was that it was something like 57% of the decisions made. Then it was 62%. Now it's like, 100% of the decisions made. But anyway, the majority of the decisions are already made, or at least I would say that the person's well on their way of making a decision before they make contact. So that contact is the commitment. And then finally, they use a heuristic called confirmation bias as they're going through the experience of talking to you. Here, confirmation bias is essentially, I'm looking for data that proves I'm right. And so, people want to feel that they made the right decision. And so they're looking for pieces of information in order to confirm to themselves that, yes, I did make the best choice and make the right decision. So that's the decision journey. These are the very specific steps of the decision that need to be made. What might a storyline look like? Starts with average women and men from all walks of life. That's who they are. They have families. They show the generations. They show all of this. And a family member is diagnosed with breast cancer. So there's, again, a diagnosis somewhere threatens my longevity. And our hero here is someone whose family member has been diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, they consider genetic testing, but they also consider the fact that it's pretty scary because, number one, it's going to reveal stuff that maybe I don't want to know. And having that information is going to be a liability. It's a liability to me emotionally. It's a liability to my family, potentially, to my care provider, and to my well-being. Then I find a new path. Some genetic testing companies offer testing, counseling, and information ownership, meaning that some companies have basically articulated who owns the information and how it's all connected together. The change is people get tested and they do what they want to do with their data. I see it. They're talking about it on their website about how people choose what they want to do with their own data. And they have, and then I see the people having new hopes for themselves, for their children, and for society, really bringing that connection of family together. This is a storyline that basically provides step by step all the right texture and the right information that people need in order to make a decision through their decision journey. So how might this story manifest? And did I just make this up? Well, several years ago, we worked with a company called Invitae, and they were a startup at the time. They're a wonderful company that were founded by and are continuing to be run by some wonderful, amazing people who just truly care about society. And this is sort of the before picture where they wanted to really show that they're reinventing genetic testing. And so we started working with them, and their tagline was basically reinventing genetic testing. And when we really dove in and talked with them and had conversations with them and read some of their writings and really understood some of the intentions of the founders and the executives, saying something like genetics is not a dividing factor, but rather a common denominator that unites humanity, irrespective of our cultural, racial, socioeconomic, religious, and political disparities. Genetically, we're more similar than different. We're all related and we are all connected. And we found that to be so beautiful and really so fitting into that whole storyline. Remember, it's, typically speaking, if you are a healthy consumer of genetic testing, then there's something that's happened outside in your broader family that is really triggering you. Either that or are driven by wanting to live longer, but there is some incident that happens. There's some trigger, some disruption that gets you thinking about genetic testing. And so for this idea that we're all connected, really brings it together. And so we created an initial brand look and feel for them, really driven by the brand story of we're all connected. Through our genetics, we're more similar than different. And the what is we are reinventing genetic testing. And so we brought that to life with a picture of the future generations, which is very hopeful looking, but also paired that online with all of that information that we were talking about, caring for families, talking about what to do with information, how do you do it. This free the data was really meant to show that Invitae doesn't want to own your information, and they're going to give it to you. So panel by panel on their website, we walk through those aspects of the decision that I just shared with you on that strategy slide, and we basically brought this entire strategy to life and this entire story to life. And we even took it into the offline world with packaging, with interior design, how they showed up at conferences and trade shows, and how they talked to the genetic counseling community and the patient community. We told patient stories, and it really brought all of this together with this whole idea about how genetic testing itself is a journey, and how we're all on this journey, and really showed images of generations and the connections. The trees are really meant to show the connections, and we'll support you every step of the way, but you own your data. It's not scary, and we move forward. Now, part of the reason why they did this is because, as I'm sure you know, with genetic testing, your worth and your equity is really about your patient population and your value proposition, and it's sort of outside of it's sort of an interconnected with technology. It's not just connected to technology itself. It's not just the technology. So there needed to be more that we added to this whole story, and this is prior to their initial public offering where they did incredibly well, raising over I think $112 million is what they ended up raising on their IPO. So just giving you an example of how you can bring all of these together into a universal platform in order to help you. What we've learned along the way of doing this is, number one, I mentioned this before, people are in an endless search for purpose. This is why so many people spend so much time on social media. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for meaning. And if we can articulate and help them articulate that purpose, they're willing to change in exchange for having more purpose. And that's ultimately what your biggest competition, your biggest headwind is. Change is hard. No one wants to change. Everyone wants innovation. Everyone wants to live a better life. No one's willing to change. And so to act, people need a lower barrier to that change. And so how do you lower that barrier? You go further upstream of when that change moment has to happen, and you help them come along with it. And you help them feel that they can change, and you give them the tools, and they see it in others. And so you show it to them in a very methodical and stepwise manner. And then finally, the hero's journey construct really is the story construct that we find that does lead to change in a nice way. And it's tidy enough that it can work for a wide variety of offerings, and we use a construct like this to come up with the messaging that we develop. Again, if you know some of our other work, we have 3 phases in the technical buying journey, and we come up with that. But the hero's journey construct leads us to that messaging. And then finally, it's just really important to reiterate, nothing about decisions and nothing about life and nothing about journeys is linear. And so when you develop this, please take that into consideration, and don't think of it as chronological. Think of it as a state of being. Think of it as an evolution, as a metamorphosis, and allow your audiences and heroes to go through it on their own, at their own pace, but it's not linear. But that's another topic for another day. And I will stop here and see if there's any aspect of this that you'd like me to go over again, or anything else that you'd like me to explain, or for us to talk about. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the question box, and I'd be happy to address it now. We just have a few minutes, and I'm happy to address something if you have a burning question in your mind. Okay, so let's talk about change for just another quick second. I want to go back to this slide where it all lines up together. Excuse the fast backwards moment here. So again, this step number 5 in all of these is really critical, and we do require that that everything leading up to it really minimizes that change. And again, going back to asking yourself, if you're a brand or have an offering or a company, what role are you playing in the lives of the heroes that you are participating in? If you're like, let's say you provide tools for research, and let's say we've identified that the researcher is the hero. Are you the mentor? Are you the helper? You're not the hero. I think we can all agree to that. I hope we can all agree to that. But you're not. Are you the mentor, the hero, or are you that elixir? Now, it might be tempting to say, well, I've got the product. I'm the elixir. But think about what that means. The elixir is really that sort of that discovery, that magic. And I mean, not to downplay it, but if I'm selling buffers, I am not the magic elixir, right? Now, I still deserve a part in this hero's journey, and I can absolutely connect with and drive the hero forward if I'm selling a buffer. But what role do I play? Do I have a helper brand? Do I have a mentor brand? And where do I play in all of this? I think that's really key. The other one to change is, I think we need to think about change as a state of mind. So when we mean change, we don't mean, oh, just switch your buffer to my product and you'll be great. What I mean is that you want to drive your audiences to have a different state of mind about how they're conducting their experiments, and maybe where they're sourcing their materials, where they're sourcing their buffers and reagents. That's the change that you want. Maybe your ultimate value proposition is a sustainability one, and so you may want to actually have some messages around change there. So anything that you do around change is going to be, really just the entire story comes to focus point in that step number 5.